The mop moved across the floor in steady, practiced strokes. Daeho had cleaned this corridor so many times that he could do it with his eyes closed. The diplomatic wing of Horizon's Gate Station was always spotless because he made sure of it. Nobody noticed a janitor, especially not at 3 in the morning, and that was exactly how he liked it. Daeho pushed his cleaning cart forward, its wheels squeaking softly in the empty hallway. He was 43 years old with graying hair and tired eyes. For 15 years he had worked the night shift on this massive space station that floated at the edge of human territory. While diplomats and politicians slept, he mopped their floors and emptied their trash bins. It was simple work, honest work, and it helped him sleep at night. The station hummed with the constant background noise of life support systems and gravity generators. Outside the windows, stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Daeho barely looked at them anymore. He had seen enough stars to last a lifetime. He reached the end of the corridor and stopped. Something was wrong. Daeho had cleaned this station long enough to notice when things were out of place. Black scorch marks streaked across the pristine white wall near the ventilation panel. The metal showed signs of heat damage. His hand reached out to touch the marks, and they were still warm. A fight had happened here. Recently, Daeho looked around carefully. The corridor remained empty and silent. Security cameras dotted the ceiling. But he knew this particular section had been waiting for maintenance for weeks. Nobody was watching this spot. He knelt down and examined the floor. Dark drops led toward the maintenance panel. Not oil. Blood. Dark purple blood. His heart beat faster. Purple blood meant Velithari. The alien empire had representatives on the station for some kind of diplomatic meeting. Humans and Velithari had been at war for over 100 years, but in recent months there had been whispers of peace talks. Daeho never paid much attention to politics. He just cleaned the spaces where important people made important decisions, but this blood trail meant trouble. Every instinct told him to call security and walk away. This was not his problem. He was a janitor, not a hero. Yet something made him pause. Daeho set down his mop and moved toward the maintenance panel. The blood drops disappeared behind it. His fingers found the release catch and the panel swung open with a soft hiss. A figure lay crumpled in the dark space behind the panel. Daeho pulled out his work light and shined it inside. What he saw made him catch his breath. She was Velithari, that much was obvious. Her skin was covered in scales that shimmered between deep blue and violet, even under the harsh LED light. Blood seeped from wounds on her side and shoulder, but it was her armor that made Daeho's hands shake. He had seen pictures of Velithari warriors before, during his time in the military years ago. This armor was different. It was ceremonial, ornate, covered in markings that spoke of extreme importance. This was no ordinary soldier or diplomat. The alien woman's eyes flickered open. They were golden with vertical pupils like a cat. Those eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to step back. Her hand moved weakly toward a weapon at her belt, but she was too injured to draw it. "Easy," Daeho said quietly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She said something in her own language, harsh and clicking sounds that he couldn't understand. But the meaning was clear enough from her tone. She was afraid, confused, in pain. Daeho made a decision that would change his life forever. He reached into his cart and pulled out a clean cloth. Moving slowly so she could see what he was doing, he pressed it against the worst of her wounds. The alien woman flinched but didn't pull away. Up close, he could see that her breathing was labored and her scales had lost some of their shine. She was dying. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would help. "Can you move?" Before she could answer, alarms suddenly screamed throughout the station. Red emergency lights flooded the corridor. Daeho's communication device crackled to life on his belt. "Attention, all personnel. The station is now in lockdown. Repeat, the station is in lockdown. There has been an attack on the Velithari diplomatic envoy. All personnel must remain in their current locations. Security teams are conducting a search for hostile forces. This is not a drill." The announcement continued, but Daeho had stopped listening. He looked down at the injured alien woman hiding in his maintenance panel. The attack mentioned in the announcement. This woman was connected to it. She might be the target. She might be the attacker. He had no way of knowing which. The woman grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. She spoke again in her language, and this time Daeho heard desperation in her voice. She was begging. For help, for mercy. For a chance to survive, he thought about calling security. That was what he should do. The safe thing. The right thing according to the rules. But Daeho had learned long ago that rules didn't always lead to the right outcome. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. "All right," he said, gently removing her hand from his wrist. "But we need to move fast." He helped her out of the maintenance space, supporting her weight as she struggled to stand. She was tall, nearly a head taller than him, and her armor was heavy. Blood continued to seep from her wounds, leaving drops on his clean floor. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Daeho thought about how he would need to clean that up later. The thought almost made him laugh. Here he was, helping a possibly dangerous alien while the station was in lockdown, and he was worried about bloodstains. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Security teams were spreading out through the station. Daeho looked at his cleaning cart, then at the injured woman leaning heavily against him. There was no way they could move quickly enough to avoid being spotted, but Daeho knew this station better than anyone. He had spent 15 years learning every corner, every shortcut, every forgotten space that existed between the official corridors, places where the important people never went, places where a janitor could move unseen. "This way," he whispered, pulling her toward a service door that most people didn't even notice. "Stay quiet." The woman nodded weakly. As Daeho keyed in his maintenance access code and the door slid open, he wondered what he was getting himself into. Behind them, the footsteps were getting closer. Ahead lay the dark service tunnels that ran throughout the station like veins in a body. Daeho guided her into the darkness and let the door close behind them. There was no going back now. Whatever happened next, he had made his choice. A simple janitor had decided to help someone in need, and he would have to live with the consequences. In the darkness, he could hear her breathing, ragged and pained. He could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. And somewhere above them, he could hear the station's security forces searching for the very person he was now hiding. The night shift had just become a lot more complicated. The service tunnel was barely wide enough for 2 people. Emergency lighting strips cast a dim red glow along the metal walls. Daeho half-carried, half-dragged the injured alien woman through the narrow passage. Her weight pressed against him, and he could feel the heat radiating from her scaled skin. Velithari ran hotter than humans, he remembered from old military briefings. "Just a bit further," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand. His voice seemed loud in the confined space. They reached a small maintenance room that Daeho sometimes used for breaks. It was cluttered with spare parts, cleaning supplies, and equipment waiting for repair. Nobody came here except him. He lowered the woman carefully onto an old tarp he spread across the floor. She collapsed against the wall, her golden eyes half closed with exhaustion. Daeho grabbed his work bag and pulled out a basic first aid kit. It was meant for human injuries, cuts, and burns from maintenance work, nothing like this, but it was all he had. He knelt beside her and tried to assess the damage. The armor made it difficult to see how badly she was hurt. The woman's eyes opened fully, watching him. She said something in her language, slower this time, as if trying to make him understand. When he didn't respond, she lifted one scaled hand to her chest and spoke a single word. "Hayrin," her name. She was telling him her name. Daeho pointed to himself. "Daeho," she repeated it, her pronunciation careful. "Daeho." Then she said something else, longer in her own language. She gestured to her armor, to the markings on it. Her voice carried weight, authority, even weakened as she was. He looked at the armor more carefully now. The patterns were intricate, worked in precious metals. The central piece bore a symbol that he suddenly recognized. He had seen it before, on intelligence reports during his military days. The imperial crest of the Velithari Empire. His hands froze. "You're not just anyone, are you?" Hayrin watched his reaction. She seemed to understand that he had figured something out. She spoke again, and this time he caught a word he knew. The Velithari word for Empress. He had heard it in old war footage and intercepted communications. This woman was Empress Hayrin, the ruler of the entire Velithari Empire. Daeho sat back on his heels, his mind racing. The most powerful alien in known space was bleeding on his maintenance room floor. This changed everything. The attack mentioned in the announcement. It hadn't been random. Someone had tried to kill the Empress. Why? He asked, knowing she couldn't answer. Why would someone do this? Hayrin reached out and grabbed his wrist again. She pulled him closer and spoke urgently. Though he couldn't understand the words, her meaning was clear. She was trying to warn him about danger. about betrayal. Her free hand made a gesture that he interpreted as her own people. Someone from her own empire had done this, a political assassination, during peace talks. If the Empress died here on a human station, the war would start again. Worse than before. Millions would die, maybe billions. Daeho gently freed his wrist and returned to examining her injuries. He needed to focus on what he could control. She had wounds from energy weapons, burns that cut deep into her flesh. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. She needed real medical help, the kind he couldn't provide. "I need to get you to a hospital," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew it was impossible. Every medical facility on the station would report a Velithari patient immediately, especially now. Security would be there in minutes, and if her own people had betrayed her, she would be dead before anyone could investigate. Hayren seemed to understand his dilemma. She shook her head weakly. Her hand touched the first aid kit, then pointed to him. She wanted him to treat her here. With his basic supplies and limited knowledge, "I'm just a janitor," Daeho said quietly. "I'm not a doctor." But he had been other things before he became a janitor. In another life, he had been trained to survive in hostile situations. Military medic training, basic field medicine, enough to keep soldiers alive until proper help arrived. It had been 20 years since he used those skills. 20 years since he had been anything other than invisible. His hands moved almost on their own, muscle memory taking over. He cut away the damaged sections of her armor carefully, revealing the burns underneath. She hissed in pain but didn't pull away. The wounds were bad but not immediately fatal. The armor had absorbed most of the energy blasts. She was lucky. As he worked, Daeho's mind wandered to the past. He had fought against the Velithari during the war. He had seen human soldiers die from weapons just like the ones that had injured this Empress. He had lost friends, lost his entire unit in one terrible battle. The memory still haunted his dreams. And now here he was, trying to save the life of a Velithari. The universe had a strange sense of humor. Hayren watched him work with her golden eyes. Despite the pain, there was intelligence in that gaze and something else. Curiosity. She spoke again, softer now, almost conversational. She pointed to his hands, then to himself, and made a gesture that seemed to ask a question. "Was I a soldier?" Daeho guessed. "A long time ago." "Not anymore." She seemed to understand his tone, even if not his words. She nodded slowly and then pointed to herself and spoke. "The word for war. The word for burden." She was telling him something about herself, about the weight she carried. They stayed like that for a while. Two beings from opposite sides of a century-long war, communicating in gestures and tone rather than words. Daeho finished bandaging her wounds with strips torn from clean cloths. It was crude work, but it would have to do. His communication device beeped. He pulled it out and saw a message from his supervisor, Tae-min. All maintenance staff were being questioned about unusual sightings. Security was conducting a sector-by-sector search. It was only a matter of time before someone checked this maintenance room. Hayren saw his expression change. She tried to stand, pushing herself up against the wall. Pain flashed across her face, but she managed to get to her feet. She was preparing to run, to fight whatever was necessary. "No," Daeho said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You'll tear open the wounds." He looked around the cluttered room, thinking fast. There was another way out of here, through the ventilation system. It would be tight, uncomfortable, and painful for her injuries. But it led to an unused section of the station, old storage areas that had been sealed off years ago. They could hide there while he figured out what to do next. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel outside. Someone was coming. Daeho moved quickly, helping Hayren toward the ventilation grate. He pulled it open and gestured for her to climb inside. She looked at the narrow opening, then at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "Trust me," he said. For a moment they locked eyes, human and Velithari, Janitor and Empress, two people who should be enemies. Then Hayren nodded and pulled herself into the ventilation shaft, biting back a sound of pain. Daeho followed her, pulling the grate closed behind them, just as he heard the maintenance room door open. "Anyone in here?" a voice called out. Tae-min, his supervisor. Daeho held his breath, squeezed into the ventilation shaft next to the Empress. Through the grate, he could see Tae-min's flashlight sweeping across the room. The beam passed over the tarp where Hayren had been lying. If his supervisor looked closely, he would see the blood. But Tae-min was tired, hurried, going through the motions. His flashlight moved on without stopping. Empty, he muttered into his communication device. Moving to the next location, the door closed. Darkness returned. In the cramped space, Daeho could hear Heirin breathing beside him, could feel her watching him in the dark. He had just lied to his supervisor, hidden a fugitive, and was now crawling through ventilation shafts with the Empress of an alien empire. His simple, quiet life was gone. Everything had changed the moment he decided to help her. But as they began moving through the darkness toward the abandoned storage sections, Daeho realized he didn't regret his choice. Not yet. Maybe he was a fool. Maybe he would end up in prison or worse. But for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Behind them, the search continued. Ahead lay only uncertainty. But they would face it together, the janitor and the Empress, bound by circumstance and a choice made in kindness. 3 days had passed since Daeho found Heirin bleeding in the maintenance corridor. 3 days of hiding in the forgotten storage sections of Horizon's Gate. 3 days of watching the Empress grow weaker. The storage area was cold and dark, filled with abandoned equipment and supplies from the station's early construction. Daeho had set up a small camp using old tarps and emergency blankets. He brought food and water during his shifts, using his janitor access to move through the station without suspicion. But it wasn't enough. Heirin needed proper medicine. She lay on a makeshift bed, her breathing shallow. The bandages Daeho had applied were soaked through with purple blood. Her scales had dulled from their original shimmer to a flat, lifeless color. When she spoke, her voice was weak, barely a whisper. Daeho knelt beside her, checking her temperature. Too hot even for a Velethari. Infection was setting in. His basic first aid supplies couldn't fight alien bacteria. She needed Velethari medical supplies, the specific antibiotics and treatments designed for her biology. The only place on the station with those supplies was the diplomatic quarter, the same area now crawling with security forces and the assassins who had tried to kill her. Heirin's eyes opened slowly. She looked at him and managed a weak smile. Over the past 3 days, they had developed their own way of communicating. Hand gestures, drawings in the dust, simple words repeated until both understood. She was teaching him her language. He was teaching her his. It was basic, rough, but it worked. "You go," she said in broken human speech. "You leave me. Safe for you." Daeho shook his head. "No, I'm getting you medicine." "To danger," Heirin insisted. "They find you. They kill you. Then I'll be careful." He stood up and gathered his cleaning supplies. The plan was risky, maybe suicidal, but it was the only chance. He would go into the diplomatic quarter disguised as what he actually was. A janitor doing his job. His face was forgettable. His presence was invisible. After 15 years, he knew every security patrol route, every camera blind spot, every schedule down to the minute. But this time would be different. This time, he would be stealing from the Velethari delegation's medical storage. This time, if he was caught, there would be no talking his way out. Heirin grabbed his hand. Her grip was weak but insistent. She looked into his eyes and spoke slowly in her language, words he had learned over the past days. Why do this? Why help enemy? It was a question she had asked before in different ways. Daeho had never given her a real answer. Now seeing her dying because he couldn't provide proper care, he found the words. "Because you're not my enemy," he said simply. "You're just someone who needs help." He pulled his hand free gently and headed toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Heirin say something else in her language. He didn't know all the words, but he recognized her tone. She was thanking him, or maybe saying goodbye. The diplomatic quarter was busy despite the late hour. Security checkpoints had been set up at every entrance. Guards checked identification and questioned everyone who passed through. Daeho approached the checkpoint with his cleaning cart, moving with the tired shuffle he had perfected over 15 years. "ID," the guard said without looking up. Daeho presented his badge. The guard scanned it and waved him through. Simple as that. Invisible again. Inside the quarter, the atmosphere was tense. Diplomats moved in tight groups surrounded by armed guards. Velethari assassins were supposedly among them, hidden, waiting for another chance to strike. Human security forces watched everything with suspicious eyes. One wrong move, one moment of unusual behavior, and all those eyes would turn to him. Daeho pushed his cart along the corridors, stopping occasionally to empty trash bins and wipe down surfaces. Just another janitor doing his job beneath notice. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands remained steady. Old training was coming back, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly when death was seconds away. He mapped out his route in his mind. The Velithari medical storage was in their secure section, 3 doors down from their main conference room. He would need to go through the ventilation system again, above the security cameras, into a space he wasn't authorized to enter. The maintenance access panel was in a side corridor, temporarily unguarded while security focused on the main areas. Deho glanced around, confirmed he was alone, and opened the panel. He climbed inside quickly, pulling his cart in behind him. The panel closed with a soft click. Inside the walls of the diplomatic quarter, Deho crawled through narrow spaces he had mapped years ago. Dust covered everything. Cobwebs stuck to his face. The air was stale and hard to breathe. But he moved forward, counting intersections, following the path he had memorized. A voice echoed through the walls, making him freeze. 2 people were talking in the corridor beyond, their voices muffled but distinct. One was human. One was Velithari. The human voice belonged to a security officer Deho recognized. The Velithari voice was cold, commanding. The Empress must be found, the Velithari said in heavily accented human speech. General Yulhuan's orders are clear. No witnesses. My people are searching every section, the security officer replied. If she's still on the station, we'll find her. See that you do. The general will be displeased if she survives to speak the truth. Footsteps moved away. Deho remained frozen, his mind racing. The assassins had corrupted human security. They had help on both sides. The conspiracy was deeper than he thought, and he had a name now. General Yulhuan, the one who wanted the Empress dead. He continued crawling until he reached the ventilation grate above the medical storage room. Through the metal slats, he could see shelves lined with containers marked in Velithari script. Medical supplies, exactly what he needed. But there was a problem. A guard stood inside the room, armed and alert. Velithari, loyal to the conspirators. The guard wasn't going anywhere. Deho's hand went to his tool belt. Among the wrenches and screwdrivers, he found what he needed. A small compressed air canister, used for cleaning dust from electronics. Not a weapon. But in the right hands, anything could be a weapon. He unscrewed the ventilation grate slowly, careful not to make noise. The guard below remained focused on the door, expecting threats from that direction. Not from above. Never from above. Deho dropped down silently, 20 years of military training overriding the fear. His hand found the guard's neck before the Velithari could turn. Pressure point precise and quick. The guard collapsed, unconscious but alive. Deho caught the body and lowered it gently to the floor. His hands were shaking now. He hadn't hurt anyone in 20 years. Hadn't wanted to, but Hayrin was dying, and he had no choice. He moved quickly through the storage room, reading labels he barely understood, grabbing containers that looked medical. Antibiotics, he hoped. Pain medication, wound treatment. He stuffed them into his work bag until it bulged. Behind him, the guard stirred. Deho had seconds before the alarm was raised. He jumped, grabbed the edge of the ventilation shaft, and pulled himself up. His arms burned with effort. He wasn't young anymore. Wasn't fit like he used to be. But desperation gave him strength. He was back in the shaft when he heard the guard shout. Alarms blared throughout the diplomatic quarter. Deho crawled faster, ignoring the pain in his knees and elbows. Behind him he heard footsteps, voices shouting orders. They were searching the ventilation system. A section ahead was blocked by security grating. No way forward. Deho looked back. Flashlight beams bounced through the shaft behind him. They were close. Too close. He pushed against the grating with all his strength. The metal groaned but held. Again. Harder. His shoulders screamed in protest. The grating gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Deho tumbled through into another shaft. This one angled downward. He slid down the metal tunnel, unable to stop, picking up speed. The world spun around him. He hit something hard and saw stars. Then he was falling, tumbling out of an open maintenance hatch into a cargo bay. Deho landed badly, his ankle twisting under him. Pain shot up his leg. He struggled to stand, grabbed his bag of stolen medical supplies, and limped toward the exit. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. His work uniform was torn and dirty. A figure appeared in the doorway. Deho's heart sank, but it was just Jisoo, one of the cargo bay supervisors. She stared at him in shock. Daeho, what happened to you? Fell, he gasped. Maintenance accident. Don't report it, please. Jisoo looked at him for a long moment. She was young, in her 20s, had always been kind to him. They had shared lunch breaks sometimes, talking about nothing important. She saw the blood on his face, the bag he clutched protectively, the fear in his eyes. You should see a doctor, she said carefully. I will. Later. Please, Jisoo. Another long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I didn't see you. But Daeho, be careful. Whatever you're mixed up in, be careful. He limped past her, moving through the cargo bay toward the service tunnels that would take him back to Hiren. Behind him, alarms still rang in the diplomatic quarter. Security forces would be searching everywhere soon. But he had the medicine. He had succeeded. The journey back was a blur of pain and exhaustion. His ankle throbbed. His head pounded. Every step was agony, but he kept moving, driven by the memory of Hayrin's golden eyes watching him, trusting him. When he finally stumbled into the abandoned storage area, Hayrin struggled to sit up. The Velithari medicine worked quickly. Within a day, color returned to Hayrin's scales. Her breathing steadied. The wounds began to heal with alien efficiency that amazed Daeho. But his own injuries were slower to mend. His ankle remained swollen, his head pounded from the concussion, and the cuts on his face were healing into scars. Hayrin insisted on treating his wounds, using techniques from her culture. She mixed compounds that smelled strange, but reduced his pain. Her scaled fingers were surprisingly gentle as she worked. They had moved beyond simple gestures now. Words came easier. She taught him her language with the patience of a teacher. He taught her his with the dedication of a student. Why you were, soldier? Hayrin asked one evening as they shared the meal Daeho had smuggled from the cafeteria. Her human speech had improved dramatically. Daeho was quiet for a moment. I was young, believed in duty, thought I could make a difference. What happened? The memories came flooding back, unwanted but unavoidable. We were ambushed, my entire unit. 42 soldiers under my command. I was their captain. I led them into a trap. His voice grew hollow. Only I survived. The Velithari forces showed no mercy. Hayrin looked at her hands, at her scales that marked her as one of those enemies. I am sorry. It wasn't your fault. You were what, a child then? I was 12. My mother was Empress. She led the military herself, very fierce, very proud. Hayrin's golden eyes grew distant. She died in battle 3 years later. I became Empress at 15. Too young, too unprepared. They sat in silence, two people shaped by the same war from different sides. Daeho realized how similar their stories were. Both had lost something essential. Both carried guilt. Both had tried to escape into different lives, but the past never really let go. Is that why you want peace? Daeho asked. Because you've seen the cost? Every day I see cost, Hayrin said quietly. Every day, reports come. This many dead, that many wounded. Children without parents, parents without children. For what? Territory? Pride? I am tired of death. But your own people tried to kill you. General Yulhuan and his followers, they love the war. It gives them power, gives them purpose. Peace is threat to them. She looked at Daeho with intensity. They will not stop until I am dead. Then they blame humans. War continues, maybe forever. Daeho understood then the weight she carried. It wasn't just about surviving. If Hayrin died here, billions would suffer. The peace she was trying to build would crumble before it began. We need to expose them, he said. Tell everyone the truth about what happened. How? We are hiding in dark room. They control security. They control communications. We have nothing. She was right. They were powerless. A janitor and a hunted empress with no resources, no allies, no way to make their voices heard. But Daeho had learned something important during his years of invisible work. The people at the top might have power, but the people at the bottom made everything function. I have friends, he said slowly. Not important people, just workers like me, but they're everywhere on this station. They see things. They have access to places. Over the next few days, Daeho reached out carefully to people he trusted. Jisoo from the cargo bay, who had already proven she would keep his secrets. Woo Jin, a young communications technician who Daeho had helped when he first arrived on the station. Taemin, his supervisor, who Daeho knew was frustrated with how security was handling the investigation. He contacted them through secure channels, using codes and meeting in places where surveillance was weak. He told them pieces of the truth, never the whole story, asking for small favors that seemed innocent on their own. Jisoo agreed to track cargo manifests looking for suspicious shipments. Woo Jin monitored communication frequencies, listening for coded messages. Taemin provided access cards and schedules. They did these things not because they understood the full picture, but because they trusted Daeho. Because in the invisible world of station workers, loyalty mattered more than rules. They took care of their own. Slowly, information began to flow back. Woo Jin discovered encrypted transmissions between the Velathari diplomatic quarters and a military ship hiding beyond the station's sensor range. Jisoo found records of weapons being smuggled into the diplomatic wing before the attack. Taemin learned that certain security officers had called in sick the night of the assassination attempt, a convenient absence. The conspiracy was bigger than they thought. Velathari military forces were positioned to attack the moment news of the Empress's death reached them. Human collaborators had been paid to look the other way. The entire peace conference had been a setup, designed to eliminate Hai Rin and restart the war with renewed fury. General Yulhuan plans carefully, Hai Rin said as she reviewed the evidence Daeho brought her. She had taught him to read basic Velathari script, and together they translated documents and messages. He knows if I die here, my people will be angry. They will want revenge. He uses their grief as weapon. Daeho leaned back against the cold storage wall. His ankle was better now, strong enough to walk without limping. The cuts on his face were fading to thin scars, but new worries weighed on him. Every day they remained hidden was another day for the conspirators to strengthen their position. "We're running out of time," he said. Hai Rin nodded. She was healthy now, her wounds healed, her strength returned. The imperial armor she had worn was beyond repair. So she dressed in borrowed clothes from Daeho's locker, simple worker's garments that hung loose on her tall frame. Disguised like this, she looked almost ordinary. Almost. "I must speak to my people," she said, "and to yours. Tell truth before Yulhuan's lies become reality." "The central communication hub," Daeho suggested. "If we could get there, you could broadcast to both empires simultaneously." "Is suicide mission. Security will be everywhere." "Probably." Daeho smiled grimly. "But I'm good at suicide missions. Ask my old unit." Hai Rin reached out and took his hand. Her scales were warm against his skin. "Daeho, I cannot ask this of you. You have done enough. More than enough. You could still walk away. Be safe." He looked at their joined hands, human and Velathari, and thought about all the reasons he should listen to her. He had already risked everything, already broken countless laws, already made himself a traitor in the eyes of many. Walking away would be the smart choice, the sensible choice. But 20 years ago, he had walked away from who he was, had hidden from responsibility, from pain, from the weight of command. He had chosen invisibility over purpose, and he had been miserable every day since, even if he hadn't admitted it to himself. "I'm tired of hiding," he said simply. "I'm tired of being invisible. Maybe it's time I stood up again." Hai Rin squeezed his hand. "You never were invisible. Not to me." Something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them had words for. They were from different worlds, different species, different lives. Any connection between them was impossible, impractical, doomed from the start. Yet it existed anyway, forged in darkness and desperation, built on trust and sacrifice. "When do we go?" Hai Rin asked. "Tomorrow. During the shift change. Security will be distracted for exactly 8 minutes. That's our window." 8 minutes. To cross the station, reach the communication hub and start broadcasting before they stop us. Like I said, suicide mission. Hayrin smiled, showing teeth that were slightly too sharp. Then we go together. Empress and Janitor, strange allies. The strangest, Deho agreed. They spent the rest of the evening planning, mapping routes, identifying obstacles. But as night deepened and exhaustion finally claimed them, they sat together in the darkness, shoulders touching, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Deho thought about his daughter, So-Ra, who he hadn't spoken to in years. She worked security on this station, though he had avoided her carefully. What would she think of what he was doing? Would she understand? Would she hate him? Hayrin thought about her empire, her people, all those who depended on her choices. She had been taught from birth that her life belonged to them, that personal desires meant nothing compared to her duty. But sitting here with this human janitor who had saved her life for no reason except kindness, she wondered if maybe personal connections were what gave duty meaning. Deho, she said softly, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. You showed me humans are not enemy. Not really. You showed me people on both sides want same thing. Peace. Safety. Simple life. Maybe that is what I fight for. Not empire. Not glory. Just right for people like you to live simple life without fear. He didn't respond with words. Just squeezed her hand and stayed close in the darkness. Tomorrow they would risk everything. Tomorrow they might die. But tonight, they had this moment of peace. Two souls finding connection across the vast divide of war. The storage area was cold, uncomfortable, filled with dust and forgotten things, but neither of them had ever felt less alone. Outside, the station hummed with life. Security forces continued their search. Conspirators plotted their next moves. The chess pieces were all in position for the final game. But here, in this small, forgotten space, the janitor and the Empress simply existed together, gathering strength for what was to come. 8 minutes. That was all they needed. 8 minutes to change the fate of Bai. The shift change happened at exactly 6 in the morning station time. For 8 minutes, as one security team signed off and another signed on, there was chaos, reports to file, equipment to check, coffee to grab. In those 8 minutes, the station's defenses had gaps. Deho and Hayrin waited at the entrance to the service tunnel. She wore a maintenance worker's uniform, a cap pulled low over her distinctive features. From a distance in the dim lighting, she might pass for human. Up close, the illusion would fail instantly. They would need to avoid close encounters. Ready? Deho asked. Hayrin nodded. Her hand rested on his shoulder briefly. Thank you for this. For everything. Thank me when we're done. They emerged from the service tunnel into a main corridor. Morning activity was beginning. Workers heading to early shifts. Automated cleaning drones humming past. A few security officers looking tired after a long night. Nobody gave two maintenance workers a second glance. They moved quickly, but not too quickly. Hurrying drew attention. Deho had learned that long ago. He pushed a cleaning cart loaded with tools and equipment. Hayrin walked beside him, her posture adjusted to appear smaller, less commanding. She had spent her life radiating authority. Now she practiced invisibility, copying Deho's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. The communication hub was in the station's central core, surrounded by administrative offices and security checkpoints. Getting there required crossing through the busiest sections of Horizon's Gate. Every step was dangerous. They reached the first checkpoint. 2 officers stood guard, checking identification. Deho's heart hammered as they approached. He handed over his ID badge with steady hands. The officer scanned it without interest, and her? The officer gestured to Hayrin. New worker, Deho said. Her badge is still processing. I have the temporary authorization here. He pulled out a forged document that Wu Jin had created. It looked official, bore the right stamps and signatures. The officer glanced at it, then at Hayrin. She kept her head down, her cap shadowing her face. Fine, move along. They walked through the checkpoint. Deho felt sweat running down his back. 1 checkpoint down, 3 more to go. Jisoo was waiting at the cargo lift as planned. She gave Deho a tight smile. Your package arrived. Like you requested, she handed him a crate. Inside were communication tools that Wu Jin had smuggled out of his department. Equipment that would let them hack into the broadcast system, They loaded it onto the cart and continued. The second checkpoint was harder. The officer there was thorough, suspicious. He stared at Hayren for too long. She coughed, turning away, using the motion to adjust her cap. The officer took a step closer. Something wrong? Daeho asked, keeping his voice casual. She looked sick. We've got health protocols during the lockdown. Just a cold. I can send her back if you want, but we really need to fix the communication relay in the central hub. Been down for 2 days. The officer hesitated, weighing regulations against convenience. Then he waved them through. Make it quick. They hurried away before he could reconsider. Hayren's hands were shaking. Too close, she whispered. We're almost there. But the universe had other plans. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a security patrol. Leading the patrol was a young woman with sharp eyes and her hand on her weapon. She wore a lieutenant's insignia and had Daeho's same facial features. His daughter, Sora. Time seemed to freeze. Father and daughter locked eyes. Shock flickered across Sora's face. Dad? Daeho had avoided this moment for years. Sora had joined station security 5 years ago, and he had made sure their paths never crossed. The last time they spoke, she had been angry, hurt, demanding to know why he had given up on everything, why he chose to be a janitor instead of the hero he once was. Sora, he said quietly, let us pass. Her eyes moved to Hayren, to the cart, back to him. Intelligence sparked in those eyes. She was her father's daughter, quick to understand. You're involved in this, the missing Empress. You're helping her. It wasn't a question. Daeho didn't insult her by denying it. Yes. Sora's hand tightened on her weapon. The other officers in her patrol were watching, waiting for orders. Everything hung in balance. One word from his daughter and this ended. They would be arrested. Hayren would be handed over to the conspirators. Billions would die in a war that didn't need to happen. Why? Sora asked. Why throw away everything for this? Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing? Dad, you're harboring a fugitive. You've stolen medical supplies. You've lied to security. You're a criminal. I know, Daeho said simply. But she's not a criminal. She's someone trying to stop a war. And she was going to die if I didn't help her. Hayren stepped forward, letting her cap fall away. Her scales shimmered under the corridor lights, unmistakably alien, unmistakably Velathari. Sora and her patrol raised their weapons instantly. Wait, Hayren said in careful human speech. She held up her empty hands. I am Empress Hayren. I came to your station for peace talks. My own people betray me. They want me dead so war continues. Your father saved my life. He showed me humans are not monsters like I was taught. He showed me one person's choice can matter. Sora's weapon didn't waver. That's a nice story, but I have orders to detain any Velathari found outside the diplomatic quarter. Then detain me, Hayren said, but let him go. He only helped because I asked. Blame me at no, Daeho said firmly. We're in this together. Sora looked between them, seeing something in their interaction that made her pause. The way they stood, protective of each other. The way they spoke, as allies, as friends, as something more. Her weapon lowered slightly. You really believe you can stop a war? She asked. We have evidence, Daeho said. Communications, cargo manifests, testimonies. Proof that this was an assassination plot by Velathari military hardliners, working with corrupted human officers. If we can broadcast it to both empires, show everyone the truth, the conspirators lose their power. And if you can't, if this is all for nothing, Daeho met his daughter's eyes. Then at least I tried. At least I stood up for something I believed in. Isn't that what you always wanted? For me to be that person again? Silence stretched between them. The other officers were getting nervous, confused by their lieutenant's hesitation. One of them spoke up. Lieutenant Sora, shouldn't we call this in? Sora was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. No, stand down. But Lieutenant, I said stand down. That's an order. She looked at her father. The communication hub is 3 levels up. Central security is heavy. But there's a maintenance access on level 12 that's only watched by cameras. Someone would need to loop those feeds. Give you about 6 minutes before anyone noticed. Daeho felt his throat tighten. Sora, I'm not doing this for you, she said sharply. I'm doing it because if what you're saying is true, then stopping this conspiracy is more important than regulations. But Dad, if you're wrong, if this gets people killed, I won't forgive you. I understand. And after this is over, we're going to have a very long talk. I'd like that. Sora turned to her patrol. We found nothing here. Let's continue the sweep. She started walking away, then paused. Dad, 6 minutes. Starting now, they ran. The time for caution was over. Daeho and Heirin sprinted through corridors using every shortcut he knew. Workers jumped out of their way, startled. Alarms began to sound. Someone had noticed the looped camera feeds. The maintenance access was exactly where Sora said. They burst through the door and found themselves in a stairwell. 3 levels up. Daeho's bad ankle protested as they climbed, but he ignored the pain. Heirin supported him, her alien strength making the climb easier. They emerged on level 12 near the communication hub. Security officers were responding to the alarms, but they were heading the wrong way, toward the looped cameras. Daeho and Heirin had minutes, maybe less. The hub's door was locked. Daeho pulled out the equipment from Wu Jin's crate. His hands moved quickly, connecting wires, bypassing security. Beside him, Heirin watched the corridor, ready to fight if necessary. The door beeped and slid open. Inside, they found Wu Jin already there. The young technician had accessed the system, prepared everything. I've got broadcast channels open to both the Terran Coalition and the Velithari Empire. Every major news network, every government frequency. When you're ready, the whole galaxy will be watching. Heirin stepped in front of the camera. She stood straight, letting her imperial bearing show. No more disguises. No more hiding. She was Empress Heirin, ruler of billions, and she was about to speak truth to power. Ready? Wu Jin asked. She nodded. Daeho stood beside the camera, offering silent support. Their eyes met for a moment. Whatever happened next, they had made it this far together. The broadcast began, and Heirin started to speak. Outside, security forces were closing in, shouting, running. They had minutes left, maybe seconds, but Heirin's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying her message across the stars. The truth was finally being told. Daeho smiled. They had done it. Whatever came next, they had succeeded in this much. The Janitor and the Empress had made their stand. Now the universe would decide what happened next. Heirin's voice filled the communication hub, strong and clear. The camera transmitted her image across billions of screens throughout both empires. Humans and Velithari alike stopped what they were doing to watch. In offices and homes, in military ships and civilian stations, everyone saw the Empress who was supposed to be dead. I am Empress Heirin, she began, speaking first in her own language, then switching to human speech. 7 days ago, I came to Horizon's Gate Station for peace negotiations. My own military forces attempted to assassinate me. They wanted to blame humans for my death and restart our war with greater violence than before. She paused, letting that sink in. Somewhere in the station, alarms were screaming. Boots thundered in corridors, security forces converging on their location. Daeho checked his improvised barricade at the door. It wouldn't hold long. General Yul Huan led this conspiracy, Heirin continued. He corrupted human officers to help him. He positioned military forces to attack the moment news of my death reached them. He used the peace talks as a trap, all because he values war more than the lives of billions. On one of Wu Jin's monitors, Daeho could see reactions pouring in, social media exploding, news networks scrambling, government officials making emergency calls. The truth was spreading like fire, impossible to contain. Heirin held up documents that Daeho's network of workers had gathered. I have proof. Communications between conspirators, records of smuggled weapons, lists of officers who were paid to look away. All of this will be released to independent investigators from both our peoples. A thunderous impact hit the door. Security forces were using a breaching ram. The barricade shook but held. Barely. But there is something more important I must tell you, Heirin said, and her voice softened. I survived because one human chose to help me. A janitor named Daeho. He found me wounded and dying. He had every reason to hate my people. We killed his soldiers. We destroyed his life. But he saved me anyway. The camera shifted slightly as Wu Jin adjusted it. Daeho tried to stay out of frame, but Heirin gestured for him to come closer. Reluctantly, he stepped into view. His cleaning uniform was dirty and torn. His face bore the scars from his injuries. He looked exactly like what he was, an ordinary man thrust into extraordinary circumstances. This is Daeho, Heirin said. He risked everything for someone he had no obligation to help. He showed me that our peoples are not so different. We all want peace. We all want to go home safely to our families. We all suffer when our leaders choose war over wisdom. Another impact on the door. Louder. The barricade was failing. Taeho moved to reinforce it, but he knew it was pointless. They had maybe a minute left. Heirin turned back to the camera, her golden eyes intense. General Yulhuan wanted me dead because I seek peace. He wanted to use my death to justify eternal war. But I am alive, and I say this clearly. Our war must end, not through more violence, not through more death, but through the courage to choose differently. The door exploded inward. Security forces poured through, weapons raised. But they hesitated, seeing the live broadcast. Shooting the Empress on camera would only prove her words true. Behind them, Belathari soldiers appeared, loyal forces from the Empress's own guard, led by Commander Shiwu wearing the Imperial crest. Your Majesty, Shiwu said, relief obvious in his voice. Thank the stars you're alive. But other Velathari were there too, conspirators wearing General Yulhuan's insignia. They raised their weapons toward Heirin. Everything happened fast. Taeho threw himself in front of the Empress. Energy blasts filled the air. He felt burning pain across his chest as a blast caught him. Then Shiwu's loyal guards were firing back. Human security was shooting at the conspirators. Wujin dove under his console. The firefight was brief but brutal. The conspirators were outnumbered, their plot exposed, their support crumbling. But in those few seconds of chaos, damage was done. Taeho felt his legs give out. He collapsed, smoke rising from the wound on his chest. Heirin caught him as he fell, her hands pressed against the injury, trying to stop the bleeding. No, you don't get to die. Not after everything. Keep talking, Taeho managed to say. Blood filled his mouth. Finish the broadcast. Medic. Sora burst into the room, her patrol behind her. She saw her father on the ground and her face went pale. Dad! She dropped to her knees beside him. Professional training took over. She pulled medical supplies from her kit and started treating the wound. But Taeho could see the fear in her eyes. The injury was bad. Maybe fatal. Heirin stood slowly. Blood covered her borrowed clothes, Taeho's blood. She turned back to the camera, and her face showed rage, grief, and determination all at once. You see what they do? They shoot an unarmed man who saved my life. They would rather kill innocents than allow peace. More impacts in the corridor outside. Fighting was spreading through this section of the station. Loyalists against conspirators. Humans against corrupted officers. The conspiracy was collapsing, but it was taking people down with it. General Yulhuan, I know you are watching, Heirin said, her voice like steel. I am alive. Your plan has failed. Surrender now and face justice, or I will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. There will be no mercy for those who choose violence over peace. On the monitors, Taeho saw Yulhuan's face appear in a counter-broadcast. The general looked furious, desperate. The Empress is a traitor to our people. She would surrender to humans. I act in the Empire's true interest. But no one was listening to him anymore. His own soldiers were turning against him, disgusted by the assassination attempt. Human forces were arresting the corrupted officers who had helped him. The conspiracy was falling apart in real time, broadcast across the galaxy. President Yunji of the Terran Coalition appeared on another channel. This is President Yunji. I am ordering an immediate ceasefire of all military operations. I am inviting Empress Heirin to formal peace negotiations under neutral observation. Those who attempted to sabotage these talks will face justice under both our legal systems. Shiwu stepped forward and saluted Heirin formally. Your Majesty, I have secured this section. General Yulhuan is attempting to flee the station. Should I pursue? Yes, take him alive if possible. I want him to answer for his crimes. The commander left quickly with his guards. The firefight was over, but the room bore its scars. Smoke hung in the air. Blast marks scorched the walls. And Taeho lay on the floor, his daughter desperately working to keep him alive. Stay with me, Dad, Sora said through tears. Medical team is coming. Just stay with me. Taeho's vision was blurring. He could hear Heirin's voice, feel her hand gripping his, could see Sora's face above him, so much like her mother's had been. He had made so many mistakes with his daughter. Pushed her away, chosen to hide rather than be the father she deserved. Sora, he whispered, I'm sorry. For everything. Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare die on me, not now. Not after you finally decided to be brave again. Heirin knelt beside them. She took Taeho's hand, ignoring the blood that covered them both. You succeeded, she told him. The truth is out. Peace has a chance. Because of you. Worth it, he managed to say. Damn you, Hayrin said, her voice breaking. You don't get to be noble and die. That's not how this ends. Medical teams arrived, pushing Sora aside despite her protests. They had equipment for treating energy weapon injuries. They worked quickly, efficiently. Deho felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher. The world spun around him. Voices spoke in urgent tones about internal damage and emergency surgery. As they carried him out, he saw Hayrin standing in the communication hub. Still broadcasting, still speaking, telling the galaxy about the janitor who changed everything, making sure his sacrifice meant something. Sora walked beside his stretcher, holding his hand. She wasn't in uniform anymore. She was just his daughter, scared and young despite her years. I've got you, Dad. I'm not letting go. The last thing Deho saw before darkness claimed him was the two most important people in his life. His daughter, who he had failed but who somehow still loved him, and the Empress, who he had saved and who had shown him he could still make a difference. Then the world faded to black, and he knew nothing more. Hours later, as Deho lay in surgery fighting for his life, the galaxy was changing around him. General Yulhuan was captured trying to escape in a stolen shuttle. His co-conspirators surrendered as their support vanished. Peace talks began immediately, with representatives from both empires meeting under the oversight of neutral observers. And everywhere, on every news channel, across every social platform, people talked about the janitor and the Empress. The story of two people from opposite sides who chose understanding over hatred, cooperation over conflict, peace over war. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When Deho finally stabilized, Hayrin and Sora were waiting outside the operating room, exhausted, covered in blood, but hopeful. Because against all odds, the simple janitor had survived. And through his survival, so had peace. The universe had decided. It had chosen compassion. It had chosen the courage of ordinary people over the ambitions of warmongers. It had chosen hope. And in a small medical room on Horizon's Gate Station, that hope kept breathing. Weak, wounded, but alive, just like the peace it had helped create. 6 months had passed since the broadcast that changed everything. The Treaty of Horizon's Gate was being signed today, ending 100 years of war between humans and the Velithari Empire. The station's main hall had been transformed for the ceremony. Diplomats from both sides filled the seats. Cameras broadcast the event across the galaxy. Deho stood uncomfortably in a formal suit, tugging at the collar. He hated these clothes. They made him feel like an imposter. He wanted his cleaning uniform, his cart, his simple routine. But those days were gone, changed by choices made in dark corridors and desperate moments. Stop fidgeting, Sora said beside him. She wore her dress uniform, medals gleaming on her chest. She had been promoted after the conspiracy was exposed, recognized for her role in helping stop it. But she had told Deho privately that the medal she was proudest of was the one for courage, because it reminded her of her father's choices. I don't belong here, Deho muttered. Neither do I. But here we are. She smiled and squeezed his hand. Just a few more hours, then you can go back to being invisible. But Deho knew that would never happen. His face was known across the galaxy now, the janitor who saved the Empress, the ordinary man who helped end a war. People recognized him everywhere, asked for autographs, wanted to shake his hand. It was exhausting. On the stage, Empress Hayrin and President Yunji signed the treaty documents. Both leaders looked tired but hopeful. The ceremony was formal, full of speeches and protocols. Deho only half listened. He had heard enough speeches in the past 6 months to last a lifetime. After the signing, there was a reception. Important people congratulated each other. Treaties were one thing, but real peace would take years to build. Trust needed time. Understanding needed patience. But at least they were trying. Hayrin found Deho standing alone near a window looking out at the stars. She approached quietly, wearing her imperial robes now. Her wounds had healed completely, leaving only faint scars that were barely visible beneath her scales. Hiding at your own ceremony? She asked in perfect human speech. Her language skills had improved tremendously. It's not my ceremony. It's yours. Ours, she corrected. This peace exists because you made a choice. Don't diminish that. They stood together in comfortable silence. Over the past months, they had developed a friendship that puzzled many, but made perfect sense to them. The Empress and the janitor, meeting regularly, discussing everything from politics to philosophy to the best way to remove stubborn stains. "I have something to ask you," Hayren said. "Come to the Velithari homeworld. Be my advisor. Help me build this piece." Deho had known this was coming. She had hinted at it before. He looked at his hands, calloused from years of work. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. I'm just a janitor who got lucky. You are the man who saw an enemy and chose compassion. That is exactly the perspective I need. Hayren, I can't live in palaces and attend state dinners. That's not who I am." "Then who are you?" It was a question he had been asking himself for months. The man he had been before the war seemed like a stranger now. The invisible janitor felt like a disguise he had worn too long. But this new person, this reluctant hero, he didn't know how to be that either. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. Hayren nodded, understanding in her golden eyes. "I hoped you would say yes, but I understand if you need something different. Just know the offer stands. Always." She reached into her robes and pulled out a small package. "Then accept this instead." A gift. Deho unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tool, similar to the multifunction devices maintenance workers used. But this one was beautifully crafted, made from rare metals with intricate engravings along the handle. Velithari symbols that he had learned to read. They spelled out words: compassion, courage, wisdom. "For the man who taught an empire to see," Hayren said softly. He held the tool, feeling its weight. Practical but precious, useful but meaningful. It was perfect. "Thank you." They stood together for a moment longer, both knowing this might be their last private conversation for a while. Duty would pull Hayren back to her empire, and Deho, he needed to find his own path forward. "Will we see each other again?" she asked. "The galaxy's a big place, but maybe, somehow." There were things neither of them said, feelings that existed but couldn't be acted upon. An empress couldn't be with a janitor. A human couldn't be with a Velithari, not in any way that society would accept. Their friendship was already pushing boundaries. Anything more was impossible. But in that moment, standing together in the quiet space while the reception continued around them, they acknowledged what might have been. In a different life, a different universe, where titles and species didn't matter. "Be well, Deho," Hayren said finally. "You too, Your Majesty." She smiled at the formal title, then left to rejoin the diplomatic gathering. Deho watched her go. This woman who had changed his life, who had reminded him that one person's choices could matter. Sora found him later, as the reception was ending. "Hey, there's someone who wants to meet you." She led him to a small room where a group of station workers waited. Jisoo from the cargo bay, Woojin the communications technician, Taemin his old supervisor, others who had helped, who had risked their jobs and safety because they believed in doing the right thing. "We wanted to say thank you," Jisoo said, "for showing us that ordinary people can make a difference." "I didn't do anything special," Deho protested. "I just helped someone who needed help." "Exactly," Woojin said. "That's the point. You didn't need to be a hero. You just needed to care, and that was enough." They talked for hours, these invisible workers who kept the station running. They shared stories of small acts of kindness they had witnessed in recent months. Humans helping Velithari adjust to the station, Velithari teaching humans about their culture, friendships forming across species lines. The Horizon's Gate spirit, people were calling it, inspired by what had happened here. Peace was taking root, one small interaction at a time. Days later, Deho returned to work. He had been offered promotions, better positions, but he had turned them all down. Taemin had kept his old job available, understanding that Deho needed normalcy. Late one night, cleaning the diplomatic wing where this all began, Deho paused at the spot where he had found Hayren. The scorch marks were long gone now. Everything was clean, pristine, as if that desperate moment had never happened. But it had happened, and it had changed everything. A Velithari diplomat walked past, heading to her quarters after a late meeting. She saw Deho with his mop and cart. Instead of ignoring him like diplomats used to do, she stopped and nodded respectfully. "Good evening. Thank you for your work." "Just doing my job," Deho said. The diplomat smiled and continued on her way. Such a small moment, but it represented something larger. Respect for all work, recognition that every person mattered. That had been Hayren's first reform in the Empire, elevating the status of workers, giving voice to those who had been invisible for too long. Daeho continued cleaning, falling into the familiar rhythm. This was who he was. Not a hero. Not a celebrity. Just a man doing honest work. But now he did it with the knowledge that simple choices could have profound impacts. That compassion mattered. That one person really could make a difference. Years passed. The peace held and grew stronger. Trade agreements followed military treaties. Cultural exchanges followed trade agreements. Slowly, carefully, two peoples who had been enemies for generations learned to coexist. Daeho grew older, his hair fully gray now, his body showing the strain of age and old injuries. But he still worked his night shift, still pushed his cart through empty corridors, still took pride in keeping things clean. Young workers would sometimes join him, asking to learn from the legendary Janitor of Horizon's Gate. He taught them about maintenance, about the station systems, about the importance of taking pride in your work. But mostly he taught them about kindness, about seeing people, really seeing them, regardless of their species or status or circumstances. One night, returning from his rounds, Daeho found Sora waiting in his quarters. She visited regularly now, their relationship healed by time and honesty. She had married a Velithari diplomat, one of the first interspecies couples. They were expecting a child, a new generation that would grow up knowing both cultures. The station wants to put up a statue, Sora told him, in the central plaza. You and Empress Hayren commemorating what happened? Daeho groaned. Please no, too late. It's already been approved. But I thought you should know the inscription they chose. It says peace begins when one person chooses compassion over hatred. Despite his discomfort with the attention, Daeho felt a warmth in his chest. If the statue inspired even one person to make the compassionate choice, then maybe it was worth the embarrassment. The statue was unveiled a month later. Daeho watched from a distance, uncomfortable with the crowd and speeches. The sculpture showed him and Hayren standing together, equal despite their different worlds. It was smaller than he expected, more humble than heroic. He appreciated that. As the crowd dispersed, Daeho noticed a message on his communication device. From Hayren, sent from the Velithari homeworld. Just a few words, thinking of you today. Thank you for everything, for showing me what true courage looks like.